why are you such an awesome geek? I love geeks. I adore them, as you know. What is it about you that makes you an awesome geek? And tell us a little bit about your history.
My shining personality is that over time I've trained myself to present data to people in a way that's easy to understand. Because I think access to data in a world of ChatGPT is trivial, right?
The gut feel investor has a feeling for what's happening in the data without the cognitive knowledge of going, oh, well, this moved from here to here to here. And when you go to the data, it usually confirms the gut. I'm ADHD and dyslexic. My daughter's ADHD and dyslexic. And I've worked years on meditation and grounding work to be able to regulate my speed, because that's the problem ADHDs have, is the regulation of the speed. Humbleness of being willing to know what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, own them, work with them, but keep the strengths. But instead of going like, oh, I'm ADHD, or I'm autistic, or I'm da-da-da, I'm da-da-da. It's like, no, baby, I'm going to choose to bring the gift forward. I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. Hey you, this is Christina Suter with Real Estate Breakthrough, and I have one of my favorite people on the planet. Seriously, Neal Bawa is one of my favorite people on the planet. He geeks out on economics, and I love geeking out on economics, and I have to bow at the feet of Neal Bawa when it comes to geeking out on economics, because, I mean, he's good. He's seriously good, and he has better access to data than I do. So we'll make sure and touch on economics as part of this conversation, because I'm still actively investing, as you are, my listeners, in 2026. What are we going to do next? But first, Neal is truly an expert in what it means to do single-family ground-up development and multifamily. So let's pump him for some information. And even before that, Neal, why don't you bring us really up to speed? Like, why are you such an awesome geek? I love geeks. I adore them, as you know. What is it about you that makes you an awesome geek? And tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, thank you, Christina. Great to be back on the show, and I really enjoy all of my interaction. I think the last time we met was at the Best Ever Conference, where they had this amazing podcast stage, and you interviewed me, and I think we geeked out like crazy. There was a large audience surrounding us by the time we finished, so that was fun. You're
fun, Neal. And that wasn't just me, my shining personality. It's your data. I'm just saying, it's your shining personality in the data. Go, babe. Go ahead.
Well, I disagree with that. And I think that my shining personality is that over time I've trained myself to present data to people in a way that's easy to understand. And I think, because I think access to data in a world of ChatGPT is trivial, right? So I can basically answer 50 of your questions in real time by asking ChatGPT while I'm talking with you. So I think it's not about data, it's about digesting that data, trying to figure out what it really means for certain people, and then trying to break it down into, little morsels, little chunks, so that people can A, get it, and B, keep it, right? And I think that last part has been a 10-year journey, where I've gone from being a rather boring speaker that could put people to sleep in 2014 to being somebody that I think people, what they say is, look, we understand what you're saying, and we get why you're saying it. And I think, so nuance, but it's not data. I think it's presenting it appropriately for people to make use of it.
I think it's well said, because being able to give people lots and lots of data. Okay, I'll interrupt you only for a minute. Love data, have always enjoyed data, but data without context is useless. Data in context is incredibly useful, but if you don't understand the background, the experience behind that data, then you don't know what it means moving forward and what decisions you're going to make. So you got to have all three layered together.
Useless to priceless is really context, right? And that's what I hope for. And what's nice is I've been on this podcast before, so I have a good sense of who you're who are the people that are listening, and that allows me to sort of somewhat tailor my comments to what might be best and most useful for them, what might be sort of a nugget for them. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited. Let's go.
Okay, so you're going to tell us a little bit about your background and why you're such an amazing geek. I'm sorry, I love geeks, so I'm just going to call you that.
I've always been a geek, right? When I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed as being sort of almost like a Rain Man, sort of a feel, where I was partly autistic, and they fixed that, so I'm no longer partly autistic. But as they went through that process, they recognized that I had a love for numbers and a love for data, and my brain was always calculating. And I'm just very lucky. Like, it's not an effort for me to look at numbers. When I look at numbers, I feel in control. When I look at numbers, I feel like I can make decisions. And so my anxiety when I take other people's money, $330 million and counting, my anxiety goes down because I'm like, well, if a year from now I turn out to be wrong, I will tell my investors the data that I looked at and the decisions that I made, and on this basis, I turned out to be wrong, but I was still a data-driven decision maker. And I think that is very important for somebody like me that takes other people's money, especially large amounts of other people's money. And there's 1,300 people trusting me with very, very large amounts of money. Or average investor invests $250,000. And so I think I'm lucky in that numbers tend to calm me down and put me in a state of zen where I can make decisions. I don't expect that everyone that's listening has the same impact with numbers. So I'll just say this, that even if you're somebody that is a gut feel person, you're somebody that wants to be a gut feel person, understand that 5 years ago, before AI came out, it would take you hours or days or weeks or months to get to key data, and so you had a really good excuse. You no longer have that excuse because all you have to do is be good at prompt engineering with ChatGPT, and you could get access to data that I didn't have access to 5 years ago in 5 minutes. And if you're not spending that 5 minutes, you're not really saying I'm a gut feel person. You're saying I'm lazy.
I was wondering if you were going to go that far.
And no, that, I mean, I listen, my job is to basically just be blunt here, right? So if you can't spend those 5 minutes, it is not about I like gut feel. It's like I don't want to spend the 5 minutes that could make my gut feel better, right? In 5 minutes, you're not going to turn into a genius, but I promise you're going to be a better gut feel investor.
Yes, because often I find in all the work I do with my clients, the gut feel investor has a feeling for what's happening in the data without the cognitive knowledge of going, oh, well, this moved from here to here to here. And when you go to the data, it usually confirms the gut, but now you have the understanding why that gut is telling you that and what are your next actions.
Yeah, here's a little secret. All those people that say that they're gut feel investors, actually they're very data driven. What happens is that they have trained their mind to make intuitive jumps based on small amounts of data, right? And those intuitive jumps are still factoring in the data. It's just the process has become subconscious for them, right? It's still data that is driving them towards this. And that intuition gets better over time because they're doing it all the time, right? So I find a lot of gut feel, investors actually like access to data. And data is such a horrible word today. I mean, because today there is no data. Data is boring. Data is spreadsheets. Data is like just looking at rows and rows of garbage that you can't make sense of. I don't do that. When a 25-page legal contract arrives from my lawyer, I take the same action. I click download, I drag it into ChatGPT, and I say, give me a summary. When a 50-page spreadsheet with 10 tabs arrives, I drag it into ChatGPT, I ask for a summary, and I basically have a question answer session. Now, people could blame me that ChatGPT could get this wrong. That is a risk I'm willing to take, right? As far as I'm concerned, I myself have gotten to the point where I don't look through those spreadsheets until I first have a full summary. And then all of a sudden the spreadsheet makes a lot more sense. So if somebody like me that grew up reading boring spreadsheets doesn't do so much of that anymore, what's your excuse?
Well said. I'm gonna sidetrack for just a minute. So as you know, I'm ADHD and dyslexic. My daughter's ADHD and dyslexic, and I've worked years on meditation and grounding work to be able to regulate my speed, because that's the problem ADHDs have, is the regulation of the speed. And so you talk about being autistic, but then you talk about we can spend time actively choosing to heal the food, the sleep, the speed that we're traveling at, the brain waves, right? Actually doing neurofeedback and being able to keep the gift of, right? Like I have the gift of being able to do multiple projects in my mind and move through them relatively smoothly as long as I can control my regulation. You have the gift of a highly focused, sharp brain, which is the gift of the quote unquote the autistic traits, is this singular deep vision. You get to keep that gift without having to have some of the limitations.
I agree, but I want to add that there's still effort that goes into this. There's still, there's days when I don't want to be data driven. There's days when I'm like, I want to just gloss over everything. Today's not my day. I don't think that I don't think anyone should just ascribe to this being just a gift that you're born with that you keep. It requires work. It requires work, and it requires ongoing work to basically stay data driven. And I fail at that. I fail at it all too often, but I come back to it. And that's the positive thing that I'll say. I come back to data. I come back to data all the time.
I love the authenticity, the humbleness, and the groundedness of being able to say, yes, I meditate every day. It's a choice every day. I could spin out any
and there are days when your meditation sucks
and
because you're really good. 20 minutes of just thinking about stuff,
yes,
and half a minute of meditation.
Yes.
That happens to me a lot when I meditate. I have a meditation teacher, and she makes me rank meditations, and I can tell you often it's like 2 out of 10.
Right. Well, to not stay on that for too long, but I just wanted to highlight like the humbleness of being willing to know what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, own them, work with them, but keep the strengths. But instead of going like, oh, I'm ADHD, or I'm autistic, or I'm I'm It's like, no, baby, I'm going to choose to bring the gift forward. I'm going to choose. And yeah, there are lots of days when that choice feels a lot harder than others, but the choice of choosing to be the gifted, good human being that we can choose to be. I just had to say that, it's a passion of mine, and I know you can tolerate it, so you'll be with me on that. All right, so now talk to me a little bit about what is ground up development facing right now, right? What are the limitations, and what are you guys doing about those limitations right now?
It's in an existential crisis, right? So I can basically say ground up development of any kind in the United States, whether you're developing retail or multifamily, or even to some extent single family. So I'm not going to extend the existential crisis to single family. It's not in a good space, but I would basically say any kind of ground up development other than single family is facing an existential crisis. Because what has happened is, even after interest rates started going up in 2023, the cap rates and all of these different assets are sold by a exotic measure called cap rates, and you don't need to know what it is to understand what I'm about to say. The cap rates were low enough for people to basically build property. Lower cap rates equals higher price, so they were low enough. But 2.5 years later, for pretty much any kind of new development, the cap rates have gone up, which means prices have gone down on a per square foot basis, to the point where most development projects simply don't pencil. So I would say that we're still doing lots and lots of development in the US. People are building hotels and multifamily and senior housing and student housing. All kinds of stuff is being built. I would say that this is the most bullish, aggressive, made up Excel spreadsheet geekery that I have seen in my career, because people are still predicting the same kind of annualized returns that they did when interest rates were 4% or 4.5% or 5% for new construction loans, where today they are 8 or 9. And that is simply not possible, right? Because you'd have to say rents in the US would have to go up, and like by a huge number, and then we'd be okay. Except rents in the United States in the last 12 months have risen by 0%, right? They haven't gone up, they haven't gone down. But because inflation has been at 3%, your construction cost and your payroll has gone up 3%. So if rents have gone up 0%, your costs have gone up 3%, well, you're going backwards. And so the last thing that you could be doing is actually projecting the same returns as 2021 and 2022. Unfortunately, every single pro forma that I've seen does that. So for now, we have industry-wide, basically everyone is ignoring the truth. Everyone is not changing their numbers. Everyone is basically in a delusional state of mind when building stuff. And yes, this applies to single family, but definitely to a significantly lower extent, because single family prices in the United States have not dropped in the last 2.5 years, but multifamily prices have dropped, 20+%. Prices for other asset classes, with the exception of industrial, have dropped. Self-storage has dropped. So have retail prices. So we've seen this drop in prices on the commercial side, that we haven't seen on the single family side, which is why I excluded single family from the existential crisis and mass delusion phase.
Well, and so with cost of construction going up, is ground up development, one, it seems like it's dropped significantly. The amount of permits that are being done down right now is dropping. What are you guys doing in relationship to that? Are you guys also pulling back on doing ground up construction because of the economy? Are you pulling back because of the business model? Like, where are you with this moving forward? Because Grocapitus is an amazing company that's very good at doing communities, right?
Yeah, but we're subject to the laws of numbers. So we have been hurt. We've laid off some of our development staff. We have canceled some of our projects. Some of our projects are basically stuck. So I have, $3 million of my personal 1031 money in projects that I cannot build at all, right? Unless I want to play that same Excel game. And so what I'm doing is I'm accepting the pain that $3 million is not going to have a return for the next 2 or 3 years. And then maybe, I can get there. So personal pain.
Not all developers do that. They don't have the choice of putting the $3 million in to stabilize a project.
Right. In this case, it was personal money, in multiple projects. So, absorbing the personal pain, shrinking the development, team, and then continuing to find projects that work, because there are still projects that work. But I don't want that to seem like something normal that I would say. Here's what I would say. The vast majority of the projects that worked for us 3 years ago no longer work. So I'd say one project out of 20 works, right? If the remaining 19 would have worked on January 1st, 2022. And so that sort of gives you an idea of just how bad the existential crisis is. But in terms of permits, you mentioned permits have dropped, right? Of course they've dropped, but they've dropped from a very high peak. So in 2022, money in America was free. Interest rate, what the government was doing was so crazy that anyone could build, and we still are suffering from the massive glut and inventory avalanche that has come through in 2024 and 2025 because of the fact that money was free in 2022. We're still suffering. This is, towards the end of 2025, and we're still suffering, and it's hurting, all the multifamily business. It's hurting single family rents. We're still suffering, and we will continue to suffer at least for another 6 to 9 months, and then thankfully it will end. My bottom line to you is this, that if 1 out of 20 projects works, then the permit pipeline should have dropped to maybe a fifth or a 10th or a 20th, right? It's only dropped to less than half. So there's still a lot being built. It's just that what we are now building, what's in the pipeline, is below the demand level, where for the last 3 years, supply has been much higher than the demand level. And that's what's kept rents in the United States from going up with inflation. If you look at a 50-year chart, and you've got 2 lines on the chart, one is rents, one's inflation, you'll notice that rents are almost always, for 49 out of those 50 years, rents are higher than inflation. So if inflation's 2% in a year, rents are probably going to be 3%, right? It's a very consistent relationship, and it only broke in the last 2 years. It broke because we had a massive glut of incoming supply. So both single family and multifamily rents were affected. Multifamily was more affected than single family, but still affected, because there was this glut, and we're still dealing with it. So again, in the last 18 months, I think rent growth in the US has been around 0. In the last 12 months, it's still been 0. In the last 3 months, it's actually been slightly negative because we're still getting so much inventory coming in. And that's put a cap on multifamily prices. And it's actually, for single family people that are listening, it's actually putting a cap on your single family prices as well, just not to the same extent. You may not be as aware of it because you're like, I've had the same, rents. Yeah, but weren't you used to your rents going up 3 to 6% every year like clockwork, and that's not happening anymore? So you're holding in place, but you're still going backwards because inflation's definitely 3%.
So let's jump for a little bit to the multifamily in general versus development. So I'm actively looking to buy multifamily because it's having this existential crisis. And so therefore I want to step in. I'm a 5 to 50 gal. I'm a mom and pop. I'm not what you guys are. Right, and so I'm buying some multifamily in Indianapolis and Tulsa. I'm finding more in Tulsa. And I've been waiting to have, especially like a market like Indianapolis, which is a stronger market, has more diversification, better diversification of jobs, blah, 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 larger city than Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's not dropping in the multifamily the way I would expect it to, because we're now 2.5 years, 3 years into the pain, and cap rates have expanded, and Indianapolis seems to have missed that, or at least the sellers in Indianapolis seem to have missed that. So what are you noticing in that area?
Not enough construction for cap rates to sort of decompress in Indianapolis. Firstly, the market has been strong in Indy. I picked Indy, and I've been talking about Indy for about 7 years, but I have my most popular presentation, which 2,700 people watch when it comes out. I picked Indy for the first time ever as my city of the year in January this year, right? So, and you're aware of that Oklahoma City, Tulsa were part of that discussion, didn't quite make the cut. So I think Indy is an unusual situation of a Rust Belt city that previously has been ignored, has had low population growth, high crime, and now we're seeing a reduction in that crime, not low crime yet, not low crime, but reduction in that crime, and we are seeing a significant amount of population growth, which you would typically not ascribe to Indy or Oklahoma City or Kansas City. So we're seeing above trend population growth. And because a lot of people know this, we haven't seen the prices in Indy go down as much as they should have, right? So because a number of those people are making a growth bet in Indy, where Indy was always a steady as you go bet. And now Indy, Kansas City, and Oklahoma are now 3 growth bets. And so, well, there's going to be a little bit of a growth premium there. But I think you are absolutely looking in the right place. And I have to say this, even though I'll get beaten up for saying this, I think the 5 to 50 space is actually a better space today than the 50 to 200 unit space. A lot of people, including myself, are in the 50 to 200 space simply because we have too many employees to do the 5 to 50 space. If today I didn't have the burden of all these employees, I'd probably jump into that space, and I'd probably do Indianapolis. And that may sound, shocking to people that say, Neal, you've always talked about scale. Sure, generally I talk about scale, and generally I like scale, but things change. Markets are different, but so today I think the market that you're in is better than the market that I'm in, even though I am looking for the same reasons as you, because I feel like this is the start of a new cycle, not a sexy cycle like, in 2020 or 2018, but a strong cycle where we are now underbuilding and will continue to underbuild for the next 3 years.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. 2026. So I always love hearing, because you have so much data behind you, you have so much expertise behind you to be able to apply that data to have it make sense. 2026, what do you think you're going to be seeing in the multifamily space? I'm asking it selfishly because this is my area. What are you going to be seeing in the multifamily space in 2026? Or what are we going to be seeing, you think?
You're going to see consistent but slow price growth and consistent but slow rent growth, with some exceptions in sub-markets in the U.S. So there are still some markets in the U.S. that are Sun Belt markets that still have too much supply coming in. They're not going to see the rent growth. They're not going to see the price growth. The rest of the markets, we are basically coming to the end of this massive mountain of supply. And it mostly ends in this year in some markets, and then a few markets it sort of drags over another quarter, another 2 quarters into 2026. But the second half of 2026, you are going to see investor optimism go up sharply. You're going to see more offers on property. So if today there are 5 offers on a property, you're going to see 10 or 15. You're going to see lenders jump in with more aggressive offers. We're actually already seeing that. And that, I think that mostly happens in the second half of 2026. So investor spirits will be unquestionably rekindled in 2026. Which quarter depends on market. Indy's already there. Other markets will get there. The Sun Belt probably won't get there throughout all of 2026. So I say to you, with the exception of Sun Belt, rekindling of investor interest in 2026, Sun Belt 2027.
Why Sunbelt 2027 versus 20? I can guess at it, but I'd rather hear you tell me.
Occupancy is not high enough. Vacancy is low. Vacancy is high. Concessions are very high. Huge amount of inventory is coming into markets like Nashville, Orlando, Dallas, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Phoenix. I mean, these markets are suffering from massive amounts of inventory and massive amounts of concessions. 2 months concessions, and some markets 3 month concessions. It basically means if you're signing up for a 1-year lease on a new property, you're paying for 9 months or 10 months. And I don't see that changing for the next 6 to 9 months, possibly even 12 months. And even after it changes, you can't just go from 2 or 3 months of concessions to no months of concession. You sort of drop concessions. You go from 8 weeks to 6 weeks to 4 weeks to 2 weeks, and you probably will stick around 2 weeks forever. It's not like concessions ever go to zero for new construction. But that process itself takes 9 months, and which is why I'm counting out 2026 as a bullish year for the entire Sun Belt.
Well said, and well described. I've been, in my mind, I feel like we had this window as soon as multifamily dropped by 20%. And then, up until they actually start lowering the interest rate. Well, they've done that, and they've done it twice now, right? Where they have lowered the discount rate. Now to me, that's the beginning of the end of this purchase window for me, right? Because like you said,
beginning of the end, right? I can tell you that the purchase window really started in Q4 of last year, right? So a million times, every time I'm on podcast, people are like, when do you think that the market hit its bottom? My answer is Q4 of last year. And it sort of has dragged along that bottom, but we are now starting to see prices go up. On a US basis, multifamily prices are finally rising. And the bottom was actually data-driven, not my gut, Q4 of last year. So CoStar said Q4 of last year is when prices were the lowest on a per door, NOI basis. And now we've seen slow but gradual increase. There hasn't been any kind of hockey puck in any market that I'm aware of, but there's been this slow and gradual increase. We're now coming to Q4 of this year. So it's basically taken a year for the recovery to take hold. And now everyone and their mother understands that, hey, when supply ends in a market, we might see some increase. I don't expect any hockey pucks, but I expect to see 2 to 3% rent growth in the next year. And then after that, the following year, I expect to see some of those markets jump to 4 to 5% rent growth. Not across the board in the US, but many markets will jump.
So well said. So if people want to engage with Grocapitus, what are you guys doing moving forward that people can engage with?
One is we're working really, really hard to find those occasional places where we can build at profit, right? They exist. And how do we find them? We basically look for markets that are a needle in a haystack. There are a total of 392 metros tracked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we're looking in all those 392 metros, and we're ranking all of these metros by some very key numbers. Some of them are pretty obvious to you guys, but some may not be. So one, rent growth, right? So we want to see what rent growth and population growth, job growth, income growth is, so typical demographic numbers. And then we're looking at, could this be the magic metro where construction costs, for some weird reason that we don't understand, are pretty low and land costs are pretty low, right? And insurance and property taxes are low. So imagine how hard this is, right? So the metro has to have all the growth stuff, right, and look like the Sun Belt. But then it has to have all of the cost stuff and look like the Rust Belt. You see what I mean? And that's really hard because, it's counterintuitive for that to happen. But Idaho Falls is like that. So I can actually build in Idaho Falls at $130 a square foot. Texas is $190 a square foot, and have the same rents as parts of Texas, right? So I have the same rents. Idaho Falls has population growth that's 2x the US, and job growth that's 3x the US. So, are there other markets? There's 1,016 cities in the US, and there's probably a dozen Idaho Falls. So our job has become practically impossible. And we're struggling with trying to find those projects and moving forward with them on the development side, so we still have the extraordinary profits that you can get from development. The second part of it is that we are looking to do what you're doing, but we're still trying to do it with maybe a 100-unit building or 150-unit building, because I still think we're still dragging along the bottom, right? So prices of multifamily have only gone up about 3% in the last year. So anybody that thinks they've missed the bottom, I would refer you to 2008. I was buying properties for $90,000. People were offering them to me for $100,000. I was thinking that they were overpaying. All of those properties are now $400,000 or $500,000, right? So here, it hasn't even been a 10% increase. It's only been a 3% increase. So if anybody thinks that you missed the bottom, you don't really understand what bottom means. Bottom is that trough that was the last 10-20%, right? You've got to be on a curve there. That's how Warren Buffett defines it. We're definitely inside that curve, right? And we were inside that curve before the Fed cuts interest rates in September and November. And I don't think it lasts, right? So I think you have maybe another 6 months, maybe 9 months to be inside of that curve. And then after that, unfortunately, it's not a buying opportunity anymore. So it's definitely a buying opportunity at this time. You are benefiting from basically the crisis and the existential crisis in the development area.
Basically. Okay, I have to ask this question before we finish. So the name of the show is Real Estate Breakthrough because I and you both use real estate to break through to our financial freedom. We always have tough times. Real estate always has good times and tough times like any industry. Why stick to real estate to break through to your financial freedom? And what does financial freedom mean to you?
Only for one reason. I believe the United States is headed for a crisis over the next 5 years because of our federal deficit. I think that most people on this show know that we are on a completely unsustainable path. That unsustainable path points to higher interest rates over the next 5 years. When I know interest rates are going to go up over the next 5 years, and there's a 100% chance of them going up over the next 5 years on average, I want to buy fixed assets. And this has nothing to do with real estate. It just so happens real estate is one of the best fixed assets. If I could find a fixed asset better than real estate, I would in a heartbeat stop buying real estate. I just haven't found one yet, right? So it's incidental that I'm in real estate. I'm not in love with real estate. I'm in love with where it's positioned as a fixed asset when tied to 100% guarantee of interest rates going up in the next 5 years. They probably will go down for the next year because, we're coming to the end of a cycle. What I'm saying is, on average, interest rates in the United States can only go up because the amount of deficit that we're producing is so stunningly high, so shockingly high, that the only way to sell that debt to other people is to offer them higher rates every single year. And so as a result, fixed assets are probably the best bet. So any kind of fixed asset that you can find on with fixed debt, sit on it for 5 years, you will enjoy a really good ride.
Neal said so well, I'd love to spend more time on that topic, but we're not going to because we are out of time. So if people want to get a hold of Grocapitus and they want to invest with you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm lucky enough to be the only Neal Bawa on the World Wide Web. So, as long as you spell my name right, the first 600, 700 links are all about me. So, that's one way to get in touch with me. That's right, Bawa. And the first name is not the American, but it's the Irish one, Neal. So remember that. So obviously that's one way to get in touch with me. But another way is multifamilyu.com, multifamily followed by u.com, where we host 12 data-driven webinars a year that about 30,000 people watch, including, your host here. And those webinars are a great way for you to empower yourself. And we spend 60 seconds timed during those webinars telling you about what we are up to and our offers. So come for a 45-minute webinar, you'll get a 1-minute pitch, and maybe you will do something about it and maybe you won't.
Well, I so respect you. Really, I truly respect you. I respect the intelligence. I respect how you choose to apply yourself as a human being. And I respect that you really try to add value to other people. 45 minutes of education, 1 minute of pitch. And I can't help but feel that you truly try to anchor us as an industry in being knowledgeable about our particular asset classes. So thank you very much for that. Neal Bawa, one of my favorite people on the planet, not just because he's so brilliant, well, mostly because he's so brilliant, actually, truth be told, but he's a wonderful human being as well. So this is Christina with Real Estate Breakthrough. Wonderful to have you on the show. Find the next episode in 2 weeks.